General Hospital spoilers reveal that Sidwell had always been a man who thrived in shadows. He built his empire not through brute strength but through the precision of manipulation, the careful orchestration of lies disguised as truths, and the subtle art of letting others destroy themselves while his hands remained seemingly clean. In Port Charles, where secrets carried as much weight as currency, Sidwell was quietly building his most dangerous gambit yet. He had chosen his target carefully, Sonny Corinthos, a man who had survived countless betrayals, mob wars, and political storms, but who now found himself walking straight into Sidwell's carefully laid trap. The scheme revolved around deception, the glamorous cosmetics company whose name had always carried with it a duality, beauty on the surface, but intrigue and ambition lurking beneath. Sidwell understood that attaching Sonny to deception through whispers of bribery would not only tarnish his credibility but also destabilize the delicate network of alliances that kept the Corinthos family intact. The brilliance of the plan lay in its layers. Sidwell didn't need Sonny to actually commit the crime, he only needed to make it appear as though he had. The first step was simple but devastating. Sidwell paid off a judge, sliding the money through channels that could never be traced back to him directly. He then manufactured a chain of evidence suggesting that the payoff had come from Sonny himself, timed perfectly with ongoing legal questions surrounding deception's expansion and financial dealings. The image of Sonny slipping envelopes under tables, of Sonny protecting his empire through bribes rather than loyalty, was enough to create a scandal that spread faster than the truth could ever travel. But Sidwell's cruelty didn't stop with tarnishing Sonny's reputation. He wanted total control, and for that he needed to dismantle the Corinthos family from within. His confession, subtly leaked at the right moment, was never intended to absolve him. Instead, it was designed to shift the blame entirely onto Sonny while setting in motion a legal chain reaction that would devastate Michael. By admitting that the judge had been bribed, Sidwell turned the custody battle over Wiley and Amelia into a firestorm. If the judge's decisions could be questioned, then every ruling tied to him could be reversed. The timing could not have been more catastrophic. Michael had been clinging to the fragile belief that he held secure custody, that no matter how messy things became, his children would remain under his care. But Sidwell's admission shattered that illusion in an instant. The court moved swiftly to reassess the custody arrangement, and to the horror of everyone involved, Willow was suddenly positioned as the most viable guardian. For Michael, it was a betrayal that cut deeper than any knife. He had stood by Willow, endured her spirals of instability, convinced himself that she could recover with support. But now the system, corrupted by Sidwell's machinations, handed her the authority he believed she was least capable of handling. He knew her fragile state of mind, her violent outbursts, her erratic behavior, the haunting incident where she had struck Lucas during an argument, the whispers that she had even tampered with Sasha's newborn at the hospital. These were not the actions of a stable mother. And yet, by the twisted logic of Sidwell's manipulations, Willow was suddenly elevated to the role of primary guardian. The impact on Sonny was immediate and brutal. Headlines screamed his name, reporters swarmed the courthouse, and whispers of bribery turned into accusations that spread like wildfire through Port Charles. For a man who had built his empire on reputation as much as power, the damage was irreparable. Even his closest allies began to wonder if the accusations held truth, because Sidwell had built his trap so carefully that it looked flawless from the outside. To the world, Sonny was no longer a protector of his family but a criminal willing to corrupt the very system he had spent decades outmaneuvering. And then there was Carly. Caught between her loyalty to Sonny and her desire to protect Michael, she became the unwilling center of a war she had never asked for. Sidwell's scheme forced her to confront impossible choices, defend Sonny and risk alienating her son, or stand with Michael and tacitly accept Sonny's ruin. For a woman who had spent her life holding the Corinthos family together, it was a nightmare scenario, tearing at the very core of her identity. Carly had always thrived in conflict, but this was different. This was family against family, truth against lies, love against survival. The tragedy deepened when Willow embraced her newfound authority with a mix of desperation and delusion. On paper, she was the children's guardian, but in reality, her instability made her a danger to them. Her moments of clarity were fleeting, overshadowed by violent outbursts and lapses into paranoia. She spoke of Sidwell as though he were a savior, not realizing she was merely another pawn in his game. To those watching, it was clear that granting Willow custody was a recipe for disaster, but the legal system, twisted by corruption and manipulation, had spoken. As the weeks unfolded, the Corinthos family found themselves spiraling into chaos. Michael's rage at losing custody consumed him, driving him to lash out at Sonny, whom he blamed for the scandal that opened the door to Willow's control. Sonny, cornered and humiliated, sought desperately to clear his name but found every path blocked by Sidwell's careful design. Carly, torn between the two men she loved most in the world, began to fracture under the strain, her strength stretched to its breaking point. Sidwell, meanwhile, watched from the shadows, his obsession not with money or power but with control. He reveled in the collapse of the Corinthos family, knowing that by tearing them apart, he had achieved a victory more complete than any courtroom could grant. His confession had not been an act of contrition but a weapon, a blade slipped between bonds of loyalty and love. And as the dust settled, he prepared for the next stage of his plan, securing Port Charles itself as his empire, piece by piece, built on the ruins of those he had destroyed. What made the scheme most horrifying was not its brilliance but its inevitability. Once the first domino fell, the bribed judge, the whisper of corruption, the confession, every step after followed naturally, as though the city itself had conspired to betray the Corinthos family. Sonny could fight, Michael could rage, Carly could endure, but none of them could undo the simple fact that Sidwell had rewritten the narrative. And in soap operas as in life, perception often mattered more than truth. The new reality was clear. Willow stood as guardian to Wiley and Amelia, despite her fragile mind and dangerous behavior. Sonny faced the possibility of prison, his empire shaken. Michael was left powerless, his children out of reach. Carly was forced into a war that threatened to consume her. And Sidwell, having orchestrated the destruction, stood ready to claim whatever pieces remained. This was not just a scandal. It was a disaster, a carefully crafted apocalypse for the Corinthos family, proving once again that in Port Charles, the most devastating enemies are not the ones who strike from the shadows but the ones who make the world believe their lies. Sidwell had never been a man satisfied with small victories. Where others might take a single win and retreat into comfort, he only saw opportunity for expansion. For him, the destruction of sunny Corinthos was not a goal, it was a necessity. Each day, each whisper, each carefully crafted scandal brought him closer to the vision that obsessed him, a Port Charles free of Sonny's influence, with the Corinthos family fractured beyond repair. What had begun as a calculated scheme of bribery and manipulation had now evolved into a campaign of annihilation, and Sidwell reveled in the chaos he had unleashed. At first, the moves seemed simple, even predictable. Frame Sonny in the deception scandal, expose him as a man willing to bribe a judge, and let the legal system do the rest. But as the plan unfolded, Sidwell realized that the destruction of Sonny's empire required something more insidious than prison bars. To truly erase Sonny's name, Sidwell needed to dismantle not just his power but his family. The people who gave Sonny purpose, who made his empire worth fighting for. The task was monumental, but Sidwell had no doubts. He was patient, methodical, and utterly merciless. Willow became the centerpiece of this strategy. On the surface, she appeared fragile, vulnerable, even broken, yet Sidwell saw in her a tool perfectly suited for his design. By manipulating the custody battle, by confessing just enough to implicate Sonny while redirecting suspicion elsewhere, he elevated Willow into a position of power she had never dreamed of. For the first time, Willow found herself standing on ground that seemed firm, holding legal authority over Wiley and Amelia, the children who had become the heart of the Corinthos family's future. To the outside world, it looked like a triumph for her, a victory snatched from despair. But Sidwell knew better. What Willow could not yet see was that her newfound advantage came at a devastating price. Every ruling in her favor, every whisper of support, was stained with Sidwell's influence. She was not a victor, she was a pawn dressed in borrowed power, her strings pulled by a man who cared nothing for her well-being. Sidwell did not elevate Willow out of kindness or strategy alone, he did it because her instability made her the perfect vessel for chaos. Her unpredictable outbursts, her fragile mental state, her desperate need to prove herself. These were qualities Sidwell could exploit, twisting her into a weapon aimed at the very family she once tried to hold together. The cracks began to show almost immediately. Willow's temper, already volatile, flared under the pressure of guardianship. Arguments with Michael turned explosive, her accusations sharper, her paranoia more pronounced. The once gentle mother now lashed out with a venom that startled even those closest to her. Lucas bore the brunt of one such eruption, but the real danger lay in her interactions with Wiley and Amelia. Though she loved them deeply, her instability translated into moments of recklessness, decisions made in anger, punishments too harsh, and an inability to separate her own trauma from the lives of the children she was supposed to protect. Michael watched in horror as the woman he once trusted with his heart began to unravel before his eyes. Losing custody had already broken something inside him, but watching Willow spiral while holding legal authority over their children drove him to the edge of despair. He blamed Sidwell, of course. Every ounce of his fury was directed at the man who had engineered this nightmare, but he also blamed Sonny. If not for the scandal, if not for the whispered bribery and the judge's fall, none of this would have been possible. His resentment toward his father deepened, creating a rift Sidwell had counted on from the very beginning. Sonny himself found no reprieve. His name, once feared and respected, now carried the stench of corruption. Allies questioned his loyalty, enemies circled like sharks, and even those closest to him struggled to reconcile the accusations with the man they knew. For decades, Sonny had been the anchor of the Corinthos family, the unshakable force who held them together through war and betrayal. But now, with Sidwell's narrative painting him as a man who would bribe a judge to protect his empire, that anchor was crumbling. And Sonny knew that once the perception of power was lost, the actual power would follow. Carly was trapped in the middle, torn between her loyalty to Sonny and her desperate need to protect Michael. She had fought battles before, against rivals, against fate itself, but this one felt different. This was not a war waged with weapons or money, but with perception, manipulation, and betrayal. She watched her son unravel, her ex-husband struggle, and Willow rise into a role that terrified her. The stress pulled at her every waking moment, threatening to fracture the strength she had built her entire life upon. For the first time in years, Carly felt powerless, and she hated it. Meanwhile, Sidwell thrived. He moved through Port Charles like a shadow, unseen but ever-present, his influence stretching into courtrooms, boardrooms, and even the private sanctuaries of his enemies. Every fight within the Corinthos family, every argument between Michael and Sonny, every paranoid outburst from Willow, was proof that his plan was working. He didn't need to lift a weapon or raise his voice, he had already set the pieces in motion, and now he simply watched them collide. But even Sidwell underestimated the cost of his manipulation on Willow. The deeper she sank into his control, the more she lost herself. Her victories felt hollow, her authority more like a cage than a crown. She began to sense the truth in fleeting moments of clarity. That she was not free, that her guardianship was not earned, that every step she took was choreographed by Sidwell. These realizations brought no relief. Instead, they fueled her paranoia further, driving her to cling tighter to the very man who had ensnared her. The children, innocent and unaware, became the silent victims of this war. Wiley and Amelia, too young to understand the politics and schemes around them, felt only the instability in their home, the tension in every room, the fear in every argument. They were supposed to be the prize, the reason for the fight, but under Sidwell's influence, they became pawns themselves, tokens in a game designed to destroy the people who loved them most. The Corinthos family, once united even in their darkest moments, now stood divided. Sonny fought to clear his name, Michael fought to reclaim his children, Carly fought to hold them all together, and Willow fought demons no one else could see. And above them all, Sidwell watched, obsessed not with victory but with total devastation. He had always believed that true control did not come from wealth or power alone, but from obsession, the kind of obsession that consumed everything it touched. His obsession was the Corinthos family, and he would not stop until they were shattered beyond recognition. Willow's so-called advantage was only the beginning. The real price would be her sanity, her children's safety, and the very soul of the family she thought she was protecting. As the storm raged on, one truth became painfully clear. Sidwell's war was not about winning. It was about destroying. And unless the Corinthos family could find a way to see through his illusions, to break free of the strings he had wrapped around them, the thorns of his obsession would strangle them all. When Wiley and Amelia were moved into Willow's care, it was portrayed as a triumph, the moment where she could finally step into the role she had fought for so desperately. The court ruled in her favor, Sidwell's manipulation paved the way, and for a fleeting second it seemed like she had won. Yet what no one could see on the surface was that this so-called victory was the beginning of something far darker. It was not a restoration of family but the quiet opening of a tragedy that would spiral with every day the children spent away from Michael. At first, Willow tried to convince herself she was ready. She decorated their rooms, planned meals, created routines, clinging to the belief that structure would fix everything. But the truth could not be hidden from the children. Wiley, old enough to sense the fracture, felt his father's absence like an open wound. He asked questions that Willow could not answer, looked at her with confusion when she tried to explain why Michael wasn't there, and his longing became a constant reminder of what she could never replace. Amelia, too small to understand the politics surrounding her, carried the anxiety in her tiny body, restless at night, clinging harder during the day, her cries sharper whenever Michael's name was mentioned. The more the children showed their need for Michael, the more Willow spiraled. Every moment of sadness from Wiley, every tear from Amelia, fed the gnawing paranoia that she was failing, that she was being judged, that she was unworthy of the very role she had demanded. Instead of grounding her, custody became a crushing weight. She overcompensated with gifts, forced joy into their days, spoke with a voice too loud, a smile too wide, but beneath it all, her obsession with proving herself only alienated her further from the children. Sidwell, of course, knew this would happen. His design was cruel in its precision. By granting Willow the illusion of power, he had locked her in a cage where every choice she made would tighten the bars. She thought she had gained control, but in truth she had been handed a burden she could not carry. The children's unspoken yearning for Michael became both her torment and her undoing, a constant reminder that love twisted by obsession cannot fill the void of stability. What appeared to be a victory for Willow was, in reality, a catastrophe taking shape. The household was no longer a sanctuary but a pressure chamber, every day building toward an inevitable collapse. And as Willow unraveled under the strain, the children's bond with Michael grew stronger in their absence, proving that no legal ruling, no manipulation, and no obsession could erase the truth of who they needed most. What Sidwell had unleashed was not simply a shift in custody. It was the planting of a disaster, a slow implosion destined to tear through Willow, through Michael, and through the entire Corinthos family.